Good morning. This is Aaron Levine, LG Insurance Agency, hanging out on another episode of the Who You Work With Matters podcast with my friend Eric Sarver. Eric, this is this is our third time recording together on different formats. I think we recorded one on the And Insurance podcast about 2 years back. And then I was lucky enough to be a guest when you were doing the radio.nyc, right? The radio show. Are you still doing the radio show or no?
Oh, you're referring to Talk Radio NYC, my
Talk Radio
Employment Law
NYC.
Today broadcast? I'm actually on a bit of hiatus, figuring out what to do next with it, but you definitely were in on some of the main episodes, right? We recorded back in the fall of 22, I think. Yes. So that was Employment Law Today. That's right.
Time certainly flies, right? Your show is Employment Law Today, and I've seen you out doing a lot of speaking engagements, talking on a lot of different podcasts lately. You know, I love the conversation about employment law. It's terrible,
Yes.
right? I'm not a lawyer, but I sell the stuff to protect the employers so that the insurance can be the one paying the attorneys for issues, unfortunately, that arise. But it's our goal to get people to be more proactive in what they're doing. So I'm eager to talk, to learn about what you've been up to, what's new with your firm, maybe talk about a couple of things that have been going on because, employee, employer, and third party cases are always fun to talk about, right? When you're not the one involved.
Sure.
So,
Right. War stories when it's not your personal involvement in that war, that they're interesting stories to tell. Yes,
they
absolutely.
are, unfortunately, and hopefully people can learn from those stories and not make the same mistakes again and again and again. But there's so many things that we can certainly talk about. But let's go back. We always have to go back to basics. So you just got barred. You didn't get barred. You're now practicing in New Jersey officially, both New York and New Jersey, which is recent over the last 2 years or so. So give us a little background about you, your law firm, and why you decided to, start practicing in New Jersey.
Yeah, it's a great question. That last one too. Well, first off, thanks, Aaron. Again, always a pleasure to see you as well and speak with you about these topics. And in terms of my firm and my practice, my law firm is Sarver Law Firm, PLC, or I call it Sarver Law Firm, as I do business, and formerly known as the Law Office of Eric M. Sarver, right? So I've been New York centric for a long time. I started my firm April 2001 in New York. I'm licensed in the New York Federal, State, and Appellate Courts. But you're right. In the last year or so, I've gotten licensed as well in New Jersey. And so what I do is for New Jerseyans, business owners, entrepreneurs, small and mid-sized companies, nonprofits, I practice employment law and business law. And so that looks like on the employment law side, which is the bulk of my practice, I do employment litigation defense, helping companies defend from those employment lawsuits. And I also do employment law compliance. So this is the the proactive side of things, right? Like you said, before your hair is on fire, let's try to follow, understand, know, and follow.
What do you like better, the litigation side or the compliance side? Am I allowed to ask you that? It's like which child is your favorite, right?
Right. Seriously, I'd say I like the litigation side better because it's more exciting and fun. But I recognize how stressful it is for my clients, right? And so there is some satisfaction in the compliance side because the compliance side again is you have a business out there, you're watching, listening today. You want to know like what are all the federal, state, and city labor and employment laws? What do I have to do? How do I follow them when it comes to hiring and firing and paid sick leave and accommodations? So if we can strategize about that, if we can set you up right, that you're not misclassifying your employees and your 1099 workers, let's say, or you're properly paying commissions, I can help to position a client and position them as such that they won't get sued. So there's a certain satisfaction in that, right? And then I draft all the employee handbooks, employment contracts, HR onboarding documents, commission agreements, severance agreements, separation agreements, things like that. So it's drafting, it's compliance, it's internal investigations as well, and then litigation defense, Department of Labor audits, New Jersey or New York State divisions of human rights, or Department of Discrimination. So I do a lot of compliance, a lot of work in that area. Yeah.
How do we get people to realize how important the compliance piece of it is, right? For business owners, especially when you're starting, right? We all start from the ground up. We don't have two nickels to rub together, as they say. um,
Right.
and building a business, and then you hire people that you know, like, and trust.
Mm-hmm.
And we always think as humans, it's not going to happen to
Mm-hmm.
me.
Yes.
When people are buying any type of insurance, it's not going to happen to me. And you
Right.
watch the
Right.
news, it's happening to a lot of people, right? We
Yes.
have record breaking weather related claims and damage
Mm-hmm.
in our country
Mm-hmm.
the last couple of years. And, I
Mm-hmm.
was in a conference the other day, and one of the charts that showed a graph from 1980 to current, right? The last
Yeah.
45 years of weather
Right.
related disaster
Hmm.
in billions of dollars. And, the curve is steep. Over the last 10 years, it's been severe. So it's happening to everybody, right? On the weather
Yes.
side. And
Right.
the storm is not much more pleasant on the employee employer side, or the third party side either.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Mm-hmm.
you know, how do we get that? How do we get that message across? Because that's always difficult.
Yes.
How do you get somebody to protect themselves as opposed to waiting till something bad happens?
Mm-hmm. Man, that is like the $1 million question, isn't it, Aaron? And literally, it could cost $1 million. It can cost a lot of money if you don't protect yourself correctly, right?
Right.
Well, I think that one way to get the message across is what we're doing right now, right? Talking about the risks, talking about the liabilities, talking about what can happen if you don't follow different federal, state, and city labor and
Hmm.
employment laws. And it's so easy to run afoul of them because there's so many to keep track of, right? That's number
Right.
one. I think right number two is like to understand what's at stake, what liability risk someone has. I think about this, what we're talking about today, and almost we can look at, let's say, like a metaphor, right, in the medical community. I'm not a doctor, a medical doctor, of course, and I know you're not as well, but you think about it like, in the last, say, 30, 40 years, how did they encourage people to do certain early detection cancer screenings?
Sure.
I think they have to show the statistics of how many people are getting these early, cancers at what age and what that looks like for them. And I think enough
Right.
people, unfortunately have enough, their sister-in-law, their brother, their relative, their neighbor who didn't do early detection and is very, very sick. And so a lot of businesses come to me, maybe you've seen this too with insurance, they come to me proactively and I say, oh, Harry, good for you, or Susan, this is great. You're coming to me, you have not been audited by the Department of Labor, you have not been sued, but you want to get all your ducks in a row. And usually it's what happened is someone they know in a networking group, in a business group together, or let's say a close relative who runs a business had that horrific experience. They didn't
Yeah.
protect themselves. They didn't get the EPLI insurance, for example. They didn't know what the law was. They ran afoul of it. Now they're looking down, they're staring down the barrel of a class action, 50 employees who are misclassified or mispaid or not given premium, overtime pay, premium pay, spread of hours pay. And they're looking at, six figures in damages and maybe six figures in attorney's fees, and their business is going under. So sometimes, it takes having the neighbor your age with a heart attack to say, I should get a cardio stress test. And that's
Right.
what I think people need to hear.
Yeah, no, I think it's important. And we talk about it all the time. Most people,
Yeah.
we start that conversation when they're, looking to get their businesses insured or looking to look at new
Mhm.
insurance. And then we talk about their workers'
Mhm.
comp and their employee employer contracts that they have. Because I want to know that they
Mhm.
have contracts in place. Hopefully they do.
Mhm.
If not, that's where we hopefully can refer them out to somebody to help get that done and help them realize the risk.
Sure.
But I had a guy tell me the other day the class, this is classic, right? We've heard this 100
Yeah.
times.
Mhm.
He goes to me, he's like, I don't need workers' comp. My employees are all 1099,
Mhm.
right?
Oh
So,
boy.
I'm like, let's have a conversation
Mhm.
about that, because are they employees or are they subcontractors? And if they're subcontractors, do they have their own workers' compensation insurance and general
Yeah.
liability insurance?
Mhm.
Are you paying them in the name of their individuals or as separate LLCs? Do you have a
Right.
contract in
Mhm.
place? There are
Mhm.
so many red flags when somebody says they have one, employees that are, and two, that they are 1099 employees.
Yeah.
That makes me cringe, and and want to run for the hills, but at the same time I want to be able to help somebody when they're in
Mhm.
that situation, because they don't understand, and
Mhm.
they need three professionals in that case.
Yes.
One, they need the insurance guy, me,
Mhm.
they need the attorney, you, to help
Mhm.
with documents, and they need the accountant too,
Mhm.
because a
Mhm.
lot of people talk about
Mhm.
1099 versus W2, and then it's the IRS stress test that goes with it, right? What defines an employee and it's, often defined by way of, the IRS and tax code to define that. But on your
Mm-hmm.
side, what's the relationship and
Mm.
who's responsible for what is super important. And if that's not well defined in some
Mm-hmm.
form of contract, it's just a recipe for disaster.
Absolutely, Aaron. Absolutely. And also, I'd add that you're right. The IRS has, I think, the 17-factor test, right, for
Hmm.
who should be considered an employee under W-2 status and who should be considered an independent contractor correctly in the 1099 status. But also, I'll add that the New York State and the New Jersey Departments of Labor and the Federal Department of Labor, the U.S. Department of Labor, they all have their own factors, tests,
Okay.
and many of them overlap with the IRS. But it's about autonomy, direction, and control, right? Who controls the way in which they do business? Are
Right.
they economically dependent mostly on the company? There's a whole bunch of the factors. And without getting lost in the weeds, I think your point's well taken that if a company says to me, hey, I've got 25 people and they're all 1099s and I have 0 employees and they come in Monday through Friday, 5 days a week, and they work 9 to 6 and I pay them once a week, well, it sounds like you've got misclassified employees. But this is where, like you said, the compliance comes in, right? In that I was talking once with a colleague years ago, and this conversation sticks out. We were having this conversation, and he said, remind me what you do again. I said, sure, I do employment law. I also practice business law, commercial litigation, contracts, business formation. But I said, I'm mostly an employment law firm and employment law attorney. And he said, oh, that's great. Which side? I said, well, usually the employer side. And he said, excellent. He said, he said to me, if I know anyone that's being sued by their employees and they're in court, and they need a lawyer, I'll give them your number. Which is kind of like saying to somebody, again, taking the medical analogy, oh, you're a dentist? Great. If anyone I know loses 5 teeth in a hockey or a car accident or a hockey game, I'll give them your card. Well, a dentist can also do checkups and cleanings, right? And
And
so
or in
you
my
can
case,
also
it's you call me when your house is on fire.
right, right. And I'm about to say about the same thing with the insurance, right? Oh yeah, my house is flooded. I need insurance. Well, now it's a little too late. Same thing with EPLI insurance, right? Employment practice liability insurance. I tell people don't wait until you get sued because then and correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the EPLI won't cover past acts. Like if you get sued on Tuesday, April 2nd, let's say, or April 10th or something like that, and you call they call you, Aaron, on April 15th and they say, hey, I want to get some EPLI insurance. Great. But someone filed a lawsuit. I mean, I could be wrong, but I believe it doesn't go retroactive, right? Or
It does not necessarily go retroactive, so they are written on a
mm,
claims made basis, right? When did the claim come
mm,
in? But it's also when did
mm,
you have knowledge of the incident or
mm.
claim
Right.
is a big
Mm,
one. And in the application process, you're going to check the box whether you have any knowledge of any incidents or situations that could arise to a claim. So
right.
if you're taking out a new policy, be very careful. It might be too little too late at that point because it's not
Hmm.
going to cover you retroactively.
Right.
Um, and if you've had a policy in the past, this one gets missed often when businesses are
Mhm.
either winding down or deciding to alter coverage with what they're doing. If they cancel that EPLI policy,
Mhm.
it's done. You have
Mm.
no more insurance. It's not like a
Right.
business owner's policy or a home policy or something else that has
Mhm.
retroactive coverage even when the policy is canceled, which is written on
Mm.
what's known as an occurrence basis. The claims
Mhm.
made basis, just like your professional liability and my professional liability for our work performed, we have to
Yes.
purchase that tail
Mhm.
in
Yes.
order to make sure there's insurance because we don't know what's going to come back from 2 years ago or today, 2 years from today, right? Depending on the statute of
Right.
limitations and what you're covered for. So people get lost in the I'm winding down my business, I'm canceling all the insurance. No, no, no. You need to protect
Mm.
yourself in the future for a
Mhm.
situation that could have happened last year and you get sued for it next year, right? Unfortunately, I've seen that situation happen. And
Mhm.
it's very painful, especially when a business is winding down. You think you're good, I'm
Mm.
retiring free and clear, and
Yeah.
then you get pinched later on. So super important to make sure that coverage is in effect when you don't need it, and you
Mm.
keep it long after you think you need it in case something
Mm.
pops up in the middle. Because at the end of the day, we know, like, and trust the people we work with until we can no longer trust them.
Hmm.
And certain things happen and change, and things change. And it doesn't always happen to be pretty. right? So that's one piece of it, is the employee
Mm-hmm.
employer relation. But EPLI
Mm-hmm.
goes so much further when we talk about it. It goes into third party, it goes into ADA, right? There's lots of stories
Mm-hmm.
about websites and not being accessible and compliant. Um,
Mm-hmm.
you
Yeah.
know, and then I have a great one right now. I want you to talk to me about this one.
Mm-hmm.
Um, we have a one of our restaurant clients in New York City got a
Yeah.
letter recently,
Mm-hmm.
a notice from an attorney for an individual that said they were unable to access the establishment and they were discriminated against, right? So an
Right. Under the
individual in a
ADA.
wheelchair was discriminated against.
Mm-hmm.
And so I went to the good old internet, the Google machine, and I typed in the
Mm-hmm.
complainant's name and
Right.
found this particular individual was party to at least 100 different lawsuits in New York City.
Right. Right.
What's going on with
Mhm.
that type of situation?
Sure, right. And the thing this underscores the importance of having EPLI insurance and having employment law counsel, because companies and business owners and restaurants think, hey, I'm a nice guy or gal, I'm a nice person, right? I run a good company. I would never do anything intentionally. I would never cheat someone from their wages, let's say, right? Discriminate against them. But the thing is, there's so many laws to follow. So what happens is that, right, you have laws that say you have to see a certain ramp in your right, restaurant, easy, right, accommodations, access under the Americans with Disabilities Act and the New Jersey and New York State versions of that, right, the state laws. Right, and there are some plaintiffs out there, and these are good laws to have, right? I mean, let's face it.
Sure.
We want companies, want businesses to accommodate people who are disabled, injured, sick, frail, right? But like there are people out there who will, scour, let's say, establishments looking for a violation. Maybe the ramp is not regulation. Maybe it's, maybe it was down one day, right? And they
Hmm.
look to threaten to sue that person or establishment, right? And often they'll try to get a quick settlement. The similar analogy I see, something very close to that, is when it comes to job postings, right? A lot of, like, say, companies that post their job online. You have internet posting on Indeed or somewhere else. Hey, we're hiring, and we say something like, they say we're a daycare. We work with children, so no one with criminal record need apply. And they're violating like certain laws, like the New York State, New York City laws, some of them which basically say you can't discriminate in the job ad just because someone had a prior record, right?
Right.
So then you have people that say you may have had that record who will apply to, like you said, 100 restaurants, right, or 100 places. They may apply to 300 places, knowing that two-thirds of them won't know exactly what the law says and will have some discriminatory language in there. And then they'll say, hey, I was denied, access, and it's under this New York City Human Rights Statute, New York State Human Rights Statute as well. So they'll either threaten to sue or they'll file a lawsuit and they'll say, well, give me $10,000 and I'll settle this. And what's interesting about that, Aaron, is that some of these people, for example, I had a story with a client where someone, like just like your complainant that you mentioned, sued, said that the job posting was said that he shouldn't apply because of a criminal background. He had a criminal record. My client did not know that was not okay to do. But the guy lived up in Rochester and the client was in Manhattan. So they couldn't, and it was an in-person job, not remote, to be clear.
Right.
It was a 5 days a week in-person type position. So clearly this person is not an actual, bona fide potential applicant who really wanted a job there, right? If you live in Rochester and you have to commute 5 days a week to New York City, I mean, you're spending more time commuting than in the office. So there are people who make it sort of a professional kind of side gig, if you will, to threaten to sue.
Which
But
is also not fair to the honest
Mhm.
business person that makes a quote unquote honest mistake, right? If
Right.
somebody's out there,
Mhm.
taking advantage of these
Mhm.
situations, there should
Yeah.
be laws against that too.
Mm. They really should, like, and I think that the problem is that, these statutes are written they want to protect people. So they make it like, sort of like a strict liability thing where it's sort of this, your intent doesn't really matter. If you have the job posting, for example, that said, we're looking for young, spirited, young workers to come and run our escape room place, but that discriminates against older workers, right? But even
Hmm.
if the company said, gee, we didn't realize that, we were just trying to attract, college students. We didn't think they're still liable. And I think what happens is that the human rights divisions like that enforce some of these rules. The New York City, for example, Commission on Human Rights, and the New York State Division of Human Rights, the New Jersey Division of Human Rights, or Division of Discrimination, rather, right, needs to know that, this was not a company that was intending to discriminate, and this was not a person who is truly affected
Right.
because you're a person that, didn't actually go to the restaurant, let's say, or, maybe the restaurant served Italian food and they're lactose intolerant. They wouldn't eat there anyway, right? Or maybe the person that applied to my client's company, who lives in Rochester, my client's in Manhattan. Well, you weren't going to work again in person anyway. But since those laws aren't changing, what we need to do is we need to really educate our clients on, number one, right, the employment compliance. Because when I come in, I tell my clients, before you post a job ad, let me know, let's touch base about, for example, New Jersey now has salary transparency laws that make it a requirement that, you've got a business, you want to hire a cook or a chef, or maybe you want to hire an architect for your architecture firm, whatever they might do, you have to post the minimum maximum salary range, right?
Right.
What the job pays. So make sure you know that so you don't run afoul of the law and get fined and penalized or get sued. So I think, like, having your insurance, EPLI insurance in place is great. Just like having cyber insurance is great for a cyber, hack or disaster. But also let's have good cyber protection in place, right? Let's have
Right.
like that's, so you got to minimize the chances of needing that cyber insurance.
Sure.
And my hope is that if my clients can hire me for the compliance, follow and have all the right employee handbooks and contracts in place, maybe they're not going to need their EPLI insurance coverage, although good to have it, because they won't get sued as much.
Yeah, and you know what? So it's not going to happen to me, and I do
Mm,
everything right, so I'm fine. I don't need the
mhm,
insurance. However, the most important piece of the insurance policy, because everybody's a good actor,
mhm.
is the duty to defend, right? You still
Right.
have a duty to defend yourself, which is
Mhm,
still going to cost you tens of thousands of dollars, regardless of whether you're wrong or right or indifferent, or if the
mhm.
insurance company decides to settle to make litigation go away, which unfortunately happens too often. But you
Yes.
still have a duty to defend yourself, which is very expensive. And the insurance coverage will provide that
Mhm.
duty to defend. So, regardless of how good you operate,
Right, right.
still need to put the insurance in place because you still have that duty to defend. And I don't think, in New Jersey yet or New York that the losing party pays legal bills, right? We're still
Right.
paying the bill no matter what. If the losing party had to pay the bill every single time, our litigation system would change significantly.
That might very well be. Sometimes arbitrations have a clause that says the losing party pays, but don't forget a lot of the situations we're talking about, like you said, right, are somebody filing a charge with the EOC or someone filing a claim in state supreme court, or then also don't let's not forget, Aaron, too, that EPLI insurance can also come up, and I believe also be relevant. Let's say if someone is being accused by the New York State or the New Jersey, let's say Department of Labor or Division of Labor, of some kind of wrongdoing. And again, the idea that people have, I think it won't happen to me. I think it's based on two fallacies. One is the fallacy, the mistaken belief that the government or the lawsuits or the only go after the big companies, right?
Right.
The truth is, you only read about or see the big companies in the news because they're newsworthy. So if 5,000 independent contractors join together in a big suit against Uber or Lyft or Google, or let's say a big sexual harassment claim comes up against, like a big news station, that'll make all the news headlines.
Right.
But the truth, what I see, maybe what you see, I see every day. I see, small mom and pop places being accused of the very same things, but it's just not newsworthy. So it's like people, but those things are still happening on a smaller scale. So knowing that you're still at risk, number one, and number two, the second fallacy I think people have of why they don't get EPLI insurance or why they don't call employment lawyers for compliance and proactive measures is because they think that if they're a good actor, right, they've done nothing wrong. They run the company well. We are like a big family here. We all play frisbee on the weekends in the summer. We're happy hour on Thursday, and
Right.
but you're a big family and everything's going well until it's not, right? And like
Mhm.
the chance of running a business and not having at least one disgruntled employee who threatens to sue or sues, or without having even maybe a bad manager who drops the ball and does something that's against the law, and you
Sure.
didn't know it, until right it's too late and you're being sued. It's just a part of doing business that the chances are high you'll be sued or fined or penalized. Think of it as if you drove a taxi in New York City. If you drove a taxi in New York City all day and night, you are going to get some tickets, right? And it could be moving violation of parking, just because of the nature of the game, right? I mean, look
Right.
where you are. And so I tell my clients, if you're running a business, like I had a client come to me and they were so distraught by an ex-employee's claims of sexual harassment, discrimination, and retaliation. And they got an aggressive plaintiff's firm and they threatened to sue, and we settled the matter. And they said, we're in such a good place. We run things so well. But again, there were some facts, situations that happen that could be misconstrued against them, and you don't want to chance it with a jury. And like you said, you have a duty to defend. So even though we got the matter, dismissed, settled, resolved, they still had to pay my legal fees to put in all that time, all those hours of, you
Sure.
know, of work, right? And so, like you said, you can't just say, "Oh, I got a lawsuit, I'm being served, but I didn't do it, so I'm not going to defend it." Well, then you get a default judgment against you. So, like EPLI insurance can be a game changer, and I tell this to my clients because if you're being sued for $30,000 or $50,000, if you don't have EPI insurance, you'll pay well more than that out of pocket, right, Aaron, to defend that suit. If you go to trial, you'll spend triple that.
Right.
So they end up paying to settle it because they're like, well, Eric, I can pay you, 20,000. I can offer the plaintiff, hey, here's 18,000. Go away, leave me alone. And a lot of plaintiffs' attorneys will say, well, $18,000 worth a bird in the hand for a tuna bush, and
Sure.
they'll take it. So,
Yeah, those are it's all very, it's all very important. Both sides
mhm.
of the puzzle, have the
Mhm.
compliance plus the insurance always
Mhm.
makes it better for managing risk for any business owner. Now, I want to go back to you a little bit.
Sure.
Um, you know, you about a year ago, a little more than a year ago, you started operating in New Jersey.
Right.
What was the motivation behind that? What was the driver? Was it because you live here, or
Mhm.
was it because you think there's a lot of cross pollination between the two states, obviously, or was it just trying to shift the business a little bit and add new capacity?
I'm going to add a choice D, and all the above, and say it
All
was
the
definitely
above.
all the above. Yes, like, I live in New Jersey. My wife and son and I, we all live. We bought our home in South Orange, so I'm in New Jersey. So I'm interacting a lot with business owners here, whether
Okay.
it's socially, other dads walking their kids to school in the morning. We start talking. Whether it's through some business networking, so I get a lot of calls, and that's why I decided to wave into New Jersey, to New Jersey State Bar, because people would call me up and say, "Hey, I've got this matter situation. I'm in court, or I'm in the New Jersey, right, division, to protect human rights. What should I do?" And I couldn't represent them without local counsel. So that's the
Right.
first part of it. Was I saw the need, and since I live here and I'm in New Jersey 2 days a week, I'm in the city 3 days a week in Manhattan. I get a lot more referrals, and also I do see the cross pollination, right? I think that for example, a lot of New Jersey companies there, and this is interesting, they'll hire outside remote workers. And if that remote worker sues under, let's say, a state anti-discrimination law, the New Jersey, Division of Civil Rights made it very clear now that under the New Jersey law against discrimination, if that company is in New Jersey, even if that remote worker is in Montana or Idaho, someplace with like not very good, robust, anti-discrimination laws, well, like they can still sue the New Jersey company under New Jersey state law. So I'm seeing a need for New Jersey employment law. I'm
Right.
seeing a lot more New Jersey laws coming out on salary transparency and minimum wage changes. And then, of course, just, the interest in, hey, why not expand to where my life is in New Jersey? My son's in school in, Jersey. My wife works in New Jersey. So those are the reasons I decided to
It's nice to
kind of
get
expand.
those easier referrals sometimes than to
Mm-hmm.
have to worry about getting them all in
Mm-hmm.
New York City, New York State as well, right? It's all
Sure.
part of that, being a part of your own community. and being able to provide services in your community instead of just commuting in and out of the city and just working in New York. And I love the cross pollination thing. And we just hired
Mm,
a remote
mm,
worker who is in upstate New York, and so we're
mm,
just now figuring out some of these nuances, especially and also on the
mm.
the tax side and workers
Right.
comp side and every side of it and understanding it. And
Mhm.
it's not my job to understand the laws for all of these. It's my job to have the experts that understand and make sure we're doing things appropriately
Right.
when it
Mm,
comes to getting things done. And so it's nice to be able to have employees in other states, but you have to make sure that you're set up for it. So that's always super important. But I love to hear you know, moving into New Jersey where I live,
mhm.
working and
Yeah.
building my community a little bit further, and then the ability to help people in both states and companies that are working in both states. That's huge. We have I have an
Mhm,
attorney friend who's in the real estate business. Most of his
mhm.
clients on the real estate side are moving out of New York and into New Jersey because most people don't
Right.
go from New Jersey to New York, but he
Mhm.
is able to handle both sides of the transaction because he's permitted to work in both states as opposed to having multiple attorneys because you're
Right.
doing transactions in multiple states. He's able to simplify that, and that's something that you're able to do as well, is to really help make it a
Mhm.
little bit easier.
I know that you are very, sort of known in New Jersey. Your agency, your insurance company, right? That you're in New Jersey. You know that you live in New Jersey, and I know you also have clients in other states as well. And I think that it is important to have a sort of a big footprint, right? To be able to go to different places. And I think there is definitely an overlap. A lot of companies, you're right. A lot of people like they live in New York and they move to New Jersey. We've seen a lot. People move to suburbs and they're you can almost guess. Let me guess. You're from Brooklyn, right? Park Slope, Brooklyn, or Cobble Hill, or
Staten
maybe you
Island.
came from right the Upper East Side or the Village. But so yeah, I think right. I think the companies need to have like representation, right? And it does save them money when they can just hire me directly and not have to have local
Yeah.
counsel here. I'm curious if you see just like an uptick, Aaron, in companies that are recognizing the need for EPLI insurance. Like I've had more and more clients that know what it is, but because I used to raise the issue with people, 5, 6 years ago, 7 years, and they'd say, I'm sorry, I don't know what is that? Like what does
Right.
that stand for? Have you seen people become more aware by or
If business owners of businesses with public accommodations are
mm-hmm.
very aware, because I think every
Yes.
association, every industry association, especially if we think hospitality,
Mm.
it's prevalent. They talk
Yeah.
about it, right?
Yeah.
So 5 years ago, you're right. It was a little bit less known. It was a
Mm-hmm.
little less expensive, and the deductibles
Mm-hmm.
were a heck of a lot lower 5 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
But
Mm-hmm.
there's been so much claim data now over the past couple of years that premiums are up, deductibles are up, but the need is also up because
Right. Mm.
if you go on Google and you say, my employer was mean to me, you'll
Right.
probably get, 30 ads for
Mm.
different trial attorneys that want to sue your employer.
Right. Yeah.
And that's what people do. We have a
Mm-hmm.
situation and we go to the internet and we Google search it, or we go into one of the AI models and we Google search what's it going to be. And they're like, makes it sound very easy. They're like, oh, you can get a settlement in 24 hours, right? Like there's people that are
Mm-hmm.
promoting, bad, I would call it bad faith opportunities, but
Mm-hmm.
it's so the need is greater, and we're seeing lawsuits grow in size. There's a term
Mm-hmm.
that we've been using on our side, not so much for EPLI, but
Right.
nuclear verdicts. We're seeing
Right. Mm. Yeah.
lawsuits that are funded by private equity and
Mm-hmm.
third party funding for litigation. It's all scary out there for the small to mid-sized business owner that
Mm-hmm.
could get sued for $10 million for no reason whatsoever. And then there's a duty to defend that lawsuit against much deeper pockets. So, um,
Right.
you know, while expenses are up, we get it. The price of eggs is up. The price to do
Mm-hmm.
anything is significantly higher. But
Mm-hmm.
managing your risk, and the better you can do on the compliance side, the less expensive it's going to be on the insurance side, right? So compliance, huge part of the risk management process and that total cost of risk, and really understanding what's going on with your business. And people just need to reach out and take that few minutes to get a grip
Mm-hmm.
and make sure
Mm-hmm.
to get those ducks in a row. Because if you don't do it because you're quote unquote too busy, whether you're selling, growing, doing whatever you're doing, things can and will eventually start to fall apart. So that's all super important. So I'm going to ask you, I want to ask you one
Yeah.
question, because one of the things I always
Sure.
talk about on the podcast is books.
Oh,
And
yes.
you mentioned a book when we were getting this set up that you really liked, for Michael J. Fox's book. So tell me a little bit about that book and why it appealed to you.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first, everything we're talking about just really great, just great like conversation, and I think that so important for people to know, like you said, that big suits and or little suits, even employees, just don't just happen to big companies; they happen to small companies too.
Right.
So having that employment law compliance, having those employee handbooks and documents in place, having insurance, EPLI insurance is so crucial. Yeah, so I read Michael J. Fox's autobiography, Lucky Man. Right, I thought it was actually a really good book, and he
Okay.
talks about just his journey with with Parkinson's. Talks about his process of coming to to accept it. To sort of fight for more funding and awareness education for it. And I just really enjoyed like reading his life process, how he was able to sort of make meaning of this and find some optimism and find some hope in the thick of some dark times. He spoke about his
Sure.
earlier years, struggling with Parkinson's, keeping it a secret, trying to get a handle on it, but I thought it was a very interesting book. It was like you got to see a lot of behind the scenes, because he mentioned, I think he came out in the news like in 1998, and everyone was just immediately shocked. But he
Right.
had been living with it then for like 7.5 years. So, yeah, I thought it was really interesting, like just his lessons learned, and it's like, not that it's he, when he was sort of trying to deny that it existed and just kind of like pretend it wasn't there, it was kind of ruling his life. But when he was able to face it and see doctors, and then he was able to manage and treat it better. And I
Right.
think there's maybe a loose metaphor that if you bury your head in the sand in anything in life, like talking about our issue today, if you pretend that the Department of Labor audit didn't happen,
Right.
and you didn't get a notice, you throw it in your desk drawer, you're going to have some big trouble, right? But if you face it head on, say, let me call an attorney, let me get my bookkeeper on the phone, let me get my records in order, and you face it, then anything you face, you have a better chance of overcoming. So
I kind of,
it was very
I
interesting.
love the way that you tied that analogy in, because that's so true. It's so important.
Mhm.
We have a friend that runs a good charity for single
Mhm.
parents with MS.
Oh,
Um,
wow. Yeah.
and it's the same thing. If you can get ahead of it and you can work with the right people and work to make yourself better,
Yeah.
you're not going to live the same way than if you were in denial. So that whole, I never thought about the analogy between all of it, but
Mm.
it totally works. And I appreciate
Mm.
you sharing that information about, Michael J. Fox's, autobiography. I'm gonna have to put that in my to-do list in my Audible files and add that. I just finished a book um, called Range by, I forget the author's name, but it was very interesting.
Mm.
It's not about the difference between people who specialize versus being a generalist, right? Um,
Mm.
Jack
Interesting.
of all, master of none, but
Mm. Yes.
so the differences between that, and some famous people in athletics who
Mm.
were never specialists as children grew up to be the best in the world,
Mm.
because they were generalists growing up as children and then were able to hone in their skills later in life. So
Mm.
pretty interesting stuff. So Eric
Yeah.
Sarver, we're up on time. I
Sure.
appreciate the conversation as
Same
always.
here.
And,
Yes.
we'll continue to be in touch. And thanks again for joining me on the podcast.
Aaron, as always, great speaking to you, my friend. Thanks for having me. Really looking forward to the next time we have a chance to touch base and connect. I love these issues that we're talking about. I know we both share a passion for our respective crafts, right? So I know how much you, yeah, are good at what you do and
We share the
insurance and
passion for, helping people understand, right? We share a passion for
yeah.
education and for helping people protect themselves, their businesses, and their families. It goes both ways. It's not just an insurance issue. It's not just a legal issue. It all has to go hand in hand. And you and I could sit down and, talk for hours, as we always do. And, I
Yep.
look forward to the next one. So thanks again, Eric.
You're welcome, Aaron. Great
All
seeing
right.
you, my friend. Great to have
You
this
too.
discussion. Have a great rest of the day. Thank you for having me.